Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Enjoy the listening. The betrayers of humanity became our last hope. The universe had long dismissed humanity as an insignificant race too fragmented and reckless to pose any real threat. The Galactic Council barely acknowledged Earth's existence, allowing it to linger on the fringes of space, seen as a backwater planet with no strategic value. But everything changed when the Krell Dominion arrived. The Krell were warlords of the void, their conquests spanning thousands of systems. They moved like a plague, consuming planets, enslaving civilizations, and razing anything that resisted. Their eyes turned to Earth, expecting an easy victory. Humanity, after all, had spent most of its history fighting itself. But the Krell weren't prepared for the unexpected. When the invasion began, Earth's defenses crumbled within weeks. The United Nations Space Force fought valiantly but was outmatched. Major cities fell, nations surrendered, and the Krell's banners rose over once proud human strongholds. The last remnants of Earth's military retreated underground, scattered and desperate. And then, against all odds, the tides turned, not by soldiers, not by generals, but by those whom Earth had once cast aside, the traitors. They were the outcasts, the exiles, the condemned, once labeled as criminals, rebels, and deserters. They had fled Earth years ago to the outer rim of the galaxy, finding refuge in lawless systems. They had turned to piracy, smuggling, and mercenary work. The Galactic Council despised them, and Earth had long considered them disgraces, but they were still human. The moment Earth fell, the exiles received the news. Among them was Captain Elias Rower, a former fleet commander sentenced to death for leading an unsanctioned attack against an alien dignitary. He had spent the last decade running guns for rogue factions, but when he saw the Krell banners over New York, something in him snapped. Earth was his home, and no matter how much it had rejected him, he wouldn't let it burn. Rower wasn't the only one. Across the galaxy, other outcasts, hackers, warlords, rogue AI specialists, and battle-hardened mercenaries, watched in fury as the Krell turned their birthplace into a graveyard. They weren't heroes, they weren't loyal citizens, but they were human, and that was enough. They began to strike in the only way they knew, dirty. The first attack came in the form of sabotage. The Krell's supply chains started failing, their weapons malfunctioned mid-battle, vital intelligence was leaked to the Resistance, ships exploded in dry docks, and high-ranking Krell officers were found dead in their chambers, throats slit by unseen hands. Then came the open war. A fleet of ships patched together from stolen vessels and black market tech emerged from the darkness of space. They had no flags, no official allegiance, only a single message broadcast to every remaining human resistance cell: we are still here, and we are not done. They struck hard and fast. Rower's fleet, the so-called Ghost Armada, operated outside the rules of engagement. They didn't fight fair. They hacked into the Krell systems, turned their own war machines against them, and used asteroid fields as deadly ambush points. They played dirty because war was never meant to be noble. The Krell, for all their might, weren't prepared for an enemy who had already lived in the shadows. They weren't ready for a force that didn't play by the rules, that knew the back alleys of the galaxy better than they did. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't fighting itself. It wasn't divided by borders, politics, or ideologies. The outcasts, the rebels, the abandoned, they had become Earth's saviors, fighting for a world that had once turned its back on them. The war was far from over. The Krell were still powerful, their forces vast, but they had made one crucial mistake: they had underestimated humanity. And humanity never forgot its grudges. The Krell didn't understand what was happening. Their war doctrine was built on overwhelming force, sweeping invasions, planetary bombardments, and swift subjugation. But against these human insurgents, their usual tactics were useless. The Ghost Armada wasn't an organized military, it was a network of outlaws, criminals, and exiles who had spent their lives surviving in the darkest corners of the galaxy. The first major blow came at the Battle of Titan's Shadow. Rower had intercepted a Krell transmission revealing an incoming reinforcement fleet. The Dominion was sending 3 dreadnoughts, massive warships that could level entire cities with orbital strikes. If they reached Earth's occupied space, it would crush what little resistance remained. Rower had no fleet that could match them in open combat. He had stolen warships, barely functioning battle cruisers, and a handful of fighters, nothing that could go toe-to-toe with the Krell's might. But he wasn't planning on fighting fair. His plan was insane. The Ghost Armada planted false intel, feeding the Krell an illusion of a retreating human fleet in the debris field of Titan's Shadow, a region littered with the wreckage of forgotten battles. The Krell, arrogant in their superiority, took the bait and entered the field at full speed, eager to crush the scattered remains of humanity's so-called saviors. That's when the trap was sprung. Hidden within the wreckage were scavenged nuclear warheads, repurposed mining explosives, and a network of remotely piloted freighters, all rigged to detonate at Rower's command. The moment the Krell dreadnoughts crossed the threshold, the stars lit up in a violent explosion. 2 of the 3 massive warships were instantly obliterated, their hulls torn apart by a cascade of detonations. The third, severely damaged and attempting to flee, was swarmed by the Ghost Armada's ships. They weren't standard military vessels but retrofitted pirate ships, cargo haulers turned into attack craft, and old Earth frigates equipped with black market weaponry. They moved with a vicious unpredictability, slicing through the remaining Krell forces with brutal efficiency. Rower personally led the final assault, piloting his aging but deadly strike cruiser, the Red Reaper, as it punched through the wounded dreadnought's defenses. His boarding team, consisting of former bounty hunters, cybernetic mercenaries, and assassins, stormed the command deck, cutting down the Krell officers with ruthless precision. By the time the last Krell commander fell, Rower stood over his corpse and sent a single message to the rest of the Dominion: the hunted have become the hunters. We are coming for you. Across the galaxy, the message spread like wildfire. Humanity, once dismissed as fractured and weak, had just taken down 3 of the Krell's strongest warships. It wasn't just a victory, it was a declaration of war. The Galactic Council, which had refused to intervene during Earth's fall, now watched with uneasy fascination. They had assumed humanity would crumble, that the Krell would be unchallenged. But now, the outcasts, the exiled, the so-called traitors were leading a rebellion that was turning the tides. And for the first time, the Krell hesitated. Rower knew this was only the beginning. The Dominion wouldn't retreat, not yet. They were wounded, but a wounded predator was even more dangerous. The next battle wouldn't be as easy, but that was fine because, for the first time in history, humanity wasn't fighting itself. They were fighting together. The Krell responded with fury. Within days of their devastating loss at Titan's Shadow, they launched a brutal counteroffensive. They targeted human colonies in the outer systems, burning settlements to the ground and massacring civilians in a show of force. Their message was clear: resistance would be met with annihilation. But humanity had already passed the point of fear. For every colony the Krell destroyed, another rose up in defiance. The Ghost Armada's victories had sparked something Earth had lost long ago: unity. Underground resistance cells, scattered survivors, and even some remnants of the old Earth military began coordinating with Rower's forces. Smugglers who once worked only for credits now ran weapons to the rebellion. Black market engineers designed war machines from salvaged Krell tech. Scientists who had fled Earth before the invasion now returned, bringing with them stolen alien schematics. The fight was no longer about survival, it was about vengeance. Rower didn't waste time. He knew the Krell would strike hard, but they still underestimated humanity's resourcefulness. The next phase of the war wouldn't be about brute force, it would be about unraveling the Dominion from within. They needed to hit something bigger than just warships. They needed to shatter the Krell's war machine. The answer came from an unlikely source: Varen Kale, a former intelligence operative who had once worked for the Galactic Council before being branded a traitor for exposing their corruption. She had spent years in exile, building her own network of informants and spies. When she joined the rebellion, she brought something priceless: knowledge. The Krell aren't invincible, she explained in a war council aboard Roar's flagship. A holographic projection of the Dominion's supply routes flickered before them. They rely on centralized command hubs to coordinate their forces. Cut off their information flow, and they'll stumble. Disrupt their supply chains, and their forces will starve. Her target was Corin Prime, a heavily fortified logistics station that controlled nearly half of the Krell's supply network in the sector. If it fell, the Dominion's war effort would grind to a halt. But taking it wouldn't be easy. It was guarded by planetary shields, orbital defenses, and a full fleet of Krell warships. A direct assault would be suicide. Roar smirked. Good thing we don't fight fair. The plan was bold. Kale's network infiltrated Corin Prime weeks before the attack, planting false orders in the Dominion's communication lines. The Krell believed the station was under threat from a rival alien faction, so they redirected a significant portion of their fleet elsewhere. Meanwhile, the Ghost Armada used a stolen Krell freighter to slip past the outer defenses, posing as a damaged supply ship. They were allowed to dock inside the station. The moment they touched down, the real battle began. Roar led the assault team, storming through Corin Prime's corridors with a mix of human rebels, exiled soldiers, and cybernetically enhanced mercenaries. The Krell were caught off guard, half their security forces had been reassigned based on the false intelligence. Within hours, they reached the station control center. Kale hacked into the systems, rerouting supply shipments to human-controlled sectors and shutting down Dominion communications across the entire region. But just as victory seemed certain, the Krell's trap was revealed. A hidden reinforcement fleet emerged from hyperspace, one of the Dominion's elite war divisions, led by High Warlord Vesk himself. Unlike the other Krell commanders, Vesk had studied humanity's resistance. He had learned from their victories, and he had come prepared. The orbital bombardment began instantly. The shields protecting Corin Prime were still active, but it wouldn't be long before they failed. The rebels were now trapped inside with no way out. This was never going to be easy, Roar muttered, gripping his rifle as the alarm sirens blared. Kale's fingers flew across the control panel. I might have an idea, but you're not going to like it. She pointed to a hidden override command, one that would detonate the station's core. It would destroy Corin Prime, the supply networks, and every Krell ship in range. But it would also leave them stranded in deep space with no way home. Roar exhaled. We've survived worse. With a single command, Kale activated the countdown. The battle wasn't over yet. The station trembled as the countdown began. Red warning lights flashed across the control center, and automated alarms blared in a language that wasn't meant for human ears. The Krell outside didn't realize what was happening yet, but the moment they did, all hell would break loose. We've got 5 minutes before this place goes up, Kale said, her voice sharp with urgency. We need an exit now. Roar's mind raced. The Ghost Armada's main ships were light years away, hiding in deep space. Their stolen freighter was useless, it had already been blasted apart in the firefight. The only way out was through the Krell warships in orbit. He tapped his comm. Vka, tell me you've got something. Vka was an ex-pirate turned ace pilot, infamous across the Outer Rim for hijacking enemy vessels. She had slipped into Corin Prime with the rest of the strike team, but her mission had been different: find a ride. Her voice crackled over the comm. I'm sitting in the hangar bay, staring at a fully operational Krell destroyer. Think you can get here before I get bored? Roar grinned. On our way. The team moved fast, cutting down Krell soldiers as they fought their way through the station's winding corridors. The enemy was in chaos. Some were still following their normal security protocols, unaware that the entire station was about to detonate. Others had figured it out and were desperately trying to override the system. It didn't matter, they were already too late. As Rower and his team reached the hangar, they found Ka standing beside a Krell destroyer, a sleek, brutal-looking warship with weapons powerful enough to punch through planetary defenses. She leaned against the hull, chewing on a protein stick like she had all the time in the world. "Took you long enough," she said, tossing Rower a data pad. "Ship's prepped. You're flying." "I thought you were the pilot," Rower shot back. Ka smirked. "I steal ships. I don't fly them." Rower groaned but didn't argue. He wasn't thrilled about piloting a Krell vessel, but there was no time for hesitation. The team rushed aboard, slamming the hatch shut just as the first wave of Krell reinforcements stormed into the hangar. Rower dropped into the pilot's chair and scanned the unfamiliar controls. "Kale, I need you to translate." "Already on it." Kale's fingers flew over the interface, hacking into the Krell systems and forcing the ship into an emergency launch sequence. The engines roared to life, and the destroyer shot out of the hangar just as the Krell opened fire. The hull shuddered as plasma rounds slammed into the rear shields, but the ship held together. Outside, the battlefield was a storm of chaos. High Warlord Vesk's fleet loomed above, their weapons locking onto the escaping destroyer. Fighters scrambled toward them, and long-range cannons lit up the darkness of space. Then Corin Prime exploded. The detonation was blinding. The station's core ruptured, sending a shockwave across the system. The blast engulfed nearby Krell ships, ripping through their hulls like paper. The orbital defenses were obliterated, and fire consumed everything in its path. For a brief moment, the battlefield was silent. Then Rower slammed the throttle forward. "Vala, get on the guns. Kale, find me a hyperspace route now." The ship twisted and weaved through the wreckage as debris rained around them. The Krell fleet, stunned by the unexpected destruction, hesitated just long enough for the stolen destroyer to break through their lines. Kale cursed. "They're scrambling their hyperspace inhibitors. We've got a 10-second window before they block the jump. Then hold on." Roa yanked the controls, pushing the ship to its limits. Krell fighters pursued them, plasma blasts grazing the hull. Vala's turrets roared in response, gunning down anything that got too close. The navigation system flashed green. Jumping. The destroyer vanished into hyperspace just as the inhibitors activated, leaving the Krell fleet behind in the burning remains of Corin Prime. For a moment, the crew sat in stunned silence, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound. Then Vok let out a low whistle. "Well, that was dramatic." Kale leaned back, exhaling. "We just crippled half the Krell war effort." Roa rubbed his temples, exhaustion creeping in. "Yeah, and now they're going to come after us with everything they have." But he wasn't afraid, because for the first time in history, humanity wasn't losing the war. They were winning. The stolen Krell destroyer hurtled through hyperspace, its engines pulsing with a steady hum. Rower sat in the cockpit, staring at the swirling blue void outside the viewport. His body ached from the battle, but his mind refused to rest. They had won against all odds. They had destroyed Corin Prime and crippled the Krell's war effort. But the war was far from over. Kale's voice broke the silence. "We've got a problem." Rower turned, already expecting bad news. "What now?" Kale tapped a few commands into the terminal, pulling up a distorted transmission. The holographic feed flickered, showing a grainy image of a familiar face, General Arden Voss, one of the last surviving leaders of Earth's resistance. His face was bloodied, his uniform torn, but his eyes were still burning with defiance. "This is General Voss," the message began. "If anyone out there can hear me, Earth is," the transmission cut out, replaced by static. Kale swore under her breath. "That's all we got before the signal was jammed." Rower clenched his fists. He's alive. Fka leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Yeah, but for how long? If the Krell let that message slip through, it means they want us to know he's alive. They're baiting us. Kale added, they know we'll come for him. Roa knew they were right. The Krell weren't careless. They had left that transmission unencrypted for a reason. They wanted the Ghost Armada to charge into a trap. And they were right about one more thing, Roa was going after him. He stood, his expression set. Where was the signal coming from? Kale hesitated, then pulled up a star map. A red marker blinked ominously over a system deep in Krell-controlled space. Draxus Prime. One of their high-security detention worlds. Vok let out a low whistle. You mean the place where they keep the prisoners they don't plan on executing quickly? That's a full-scale fortress. We'd need an entire fleet to break in. Roar's gaze didn't waver. Then we'll get one. Silence filled the bridge. Kale was the first to speak. You're talking about uniting the resistance. They won't trust us, Fka added. Half the human colonies still think we're criminals. Some of them might even sell us out to the Krell to save their own skins. They don't have a choice, Roar said. His voice was cold, firm. The Krell aren't just trying to rule us. They want to wipe us out. Earth is already a graveyard, and the rest of our people are scattered and broken. If we don't stand together now, we never will. Kale studied him, then nodded. All right. Let's say we rally what's left of humanity. Where do we start? Roar pulled up the star map, zooming in on a remote sector filled with asteroid belts and abandoned outposts. The Bastion Rim. Fka raised an eyebrow. You want to go to the most lawless part of the galaxy? Roar smirked. That's where the best fighters are. Kale sighed. So let me get this straight, your plan is to find the most dangerous, untrustworthy, violent people in the galaxy and convince them to fight with us instead of against us. That's the plan. Vok grinned. I like it. Kale groaned. This is going to be a disaster. Roar didn't argue. It was a reckless plan. It would take every ounce of diplomacy, intimidation, and sheer luck to convince the warlords, mercenaries, and exiles of the Bastion Rim to unite under a single banner. But if they pulled it off, the Krell wouldn't be facing just another rebellion. They'd be facing humanity's worst nightmares. Roar turned back to the controls, setting their course. Buckle up. We're about to start a war. The Bastion Rim was a place even the Krell didn't dare to tread.